with ransomware. And to date, I think we've only had maybe one or two that had to pay the ransom because they either weren't doing backups, or the way that it hit was just something more personal on a specific laptop or things like that. And the data was so crucial to the business that they had to pay it. And we've, helped them navigate that. But I think that in a well designed environment from a security standpoint, backup and redundancy, really, business continuity as a whole, if that's set up right and in place, there shouldn't be a reason why you have to pay that ransom. Now, I've heard of stories of companies that didn't have those in place, or they thought they had the right stuff in place, but somehow it either got into the backups for multiple months and then ended up encrypting those, or when they did a restore, it immediately encrypted them again, and then they didn't have any that didn't have it. So a lot of tools we use will do like a verification of the backup. It'll do a check for ransomware in the files and things like that. So that way you don't end up in that type of situation. And in those situations, if you don't have the ability to retain your data, I've read articles or things about that companies that have had to do that. And it really comes down to the business case of, if you don't get that data back, are you out of business, and what's the value? I mean, if they're asking for $100,000 and you're going to lose a multi-million-dollar business, is that worth it? And most of the time it probably is if you don't have this stuff in place. But then it's also kind of a luck of the draw on if you're going to get a reputable thief, if you will, and if they'll actually get back to you. Fortunately, a couple of times that I've been involved with helping someone with it, I've gotten nice bad guys.
Nice bad guys that'll take your money.
Yeah, exactly. So I think with the right precautions in place, a majority of the time, I won't say never, but majority of the time, you would not need to pay the ransom.
Because you brought up an interesting point too of what's your business worth versus how much you have to pay, and sometimes it's not holistic. It's more, you have let's just say an automotive line that has to keep moving, and so
it might just be not you specifically that's affected. It could be a whole industry that becomes affected by it.
And it's a daily loss, like every hour, or even hourly loss. Every hour that line sets idle, you're losing X amount of money.
Or you have vendors that are, especially in automotive, that have requirements in place to say, like, if this line's not running, you owe us X amount of dollars.
Right.
So it's a complicated question. That's why good business continuity practice is very important these days.
And we help a lot of people with that because unfortunately, sometimes by the time they reach out to us, it's already happened. Maybe we've just been doing their voice, or maybe we've just been doing, website stuff, or just a single portion of their business. And then an incident happens, and then they're like, so they'll ask us because we're already a trusted source. And, sometimes it's good and we can recover, and sometimes they should have been doing best practices to start with. But it's why it's good to...
It's never too late to have that conversation.
That's right. It's never too late to have that conversation. And it's nothing to be embarrassed about. I mean, that you don't have those things in place or that you can't readily find them. But you have to stop and think, if that happens like today at noon, how not only do I have all that information, but how quickly can I access it to shut it down, to flip the switch and restore my data? I mean, that time is so valuable for clients.
Yep. And that's, the tools that we've talked about on previous chats, it has talked a lot about the layering of things. Mm-hmm. And one of those is, using tools that get installed on either in devices, whether that's servers, computers, tablets, whatever, that can detect those. So ransomware does a ton of changes very quickly, right? And it's going to use it's going to use whatever encryption method, and it's going to have whatever end phrase on it, or, a 3-letter acronym, or whatever you want to call it, or file type name change. And it will detect those on one machine, so it activates there. It will detect them on that. It will then shut that machine off, put it into network isolation, so it can't talk to anything else on the network. So typically how ransomware will work is it'll infect one machine. They'll look whatever shares or whatever's open. It'll use an admin password or whatever to be able to jump from one machine to the next machine and so on and so forth until it's traversed the entire network. And specifically looking for like mapped company drives or things like that. So if you can have a tool on your machine or in your network that says, hey, this laptop is doing all of these crazy changes really quickly, that's not good. We're going to perform network isolation on it. It's going to remove it from being able to talk to anything on the network. And then it would allow, in this case, it would allow our team to be able to still connect to it remotely through a secure path to be able to remediate it and understand what's going on. Sometimes it can be a false positive, which I would always rather have a false positive than miss something that happens. And then we can go in and whitelist it and life goes on. Or it caught something really bad before it was able to spread even worse. And that's the big thing here, is trying to catch it as quickly as you can to keep it from going too far into the system.
I've got a question about you mentioned business continuity and how we offer a lot of services that can give people that peace of mind. Would you recommend some sort of quote unquote fire drill to kind of test that backup and continuity system?
Yeah. So the systems that we use, nightly, I think it's nightly, we'll perform a check. We'll actually spin up a copy of the backup to be able to make sure that it is actually functional. And so a lot of it is automated, but yes, I mean, there is definitely, depending on the requirements, either from insurance or internal practice, what you want to do, you can go as far as saying, okay, we're going to spin this up, move our production to it, make sure everything works as expected, make sure it's working, and then we will then decom, move it, merge everything back. So depending on how far down that path you want to go, it becomes a little difficult to. It can be very not difficult. It become very time. What's the word I'm looking for? Time consuming to be able to do that all fully fleshed out. So we try and use tools that will give us a test that we know the backup is good and functional and that it ran successfully and that it has all the data that we need in it. But it will also it also allows us to not maybe have to do every single month or something or run that same test, but is definitely something that is recommended, especially when you put a new tool in place. Going through that action, making sure that actually works, is very important. So doing a test restore, especially after you deploy some sort of new backup or business continuity, is very important.
As tedious and time consuming as it may be, depending on the size of your company, it's well worth the investment, because again, if it happens at this time, how quickly can you recover?
Yeah. Yep.
Any other questions?
Cost of downtime, right?
Cost of downtime, yes. We have a calculator for that.
Mm-hmm.
No questions right now.
Okay, so last week I was getting hassled about not having a password manager.
Last 2 weeks, I think.
I got it again last week.
Yeah, I know. It's been ongoing
for
a little while now.
I now have that on my phone. So I chose Dashlane. And so
Didn't choose Prancer?
Didn't. I would have if that would have been an option. Not Rudolph, though.
No,
he's too
that
old.
That one's terrible.
So anyway, all of a sudden it's like scanning all my old whatever, and I had 2 alerts on there. One from like 2015 that my stuff was found out on the dark web, but one from just earlier this year from an app that I have on my phone that my email, password, not the credit card information, but something else was compromised.
Personal identifying information or something.
Anyway, I thought if you could take a moment and explain to those of us that may not understand what the dark web is.
Dark web.
Oh, you're on the dark web.
Chris, can you pull up the image that everyone uses for it that is an iceberg? That's the one that always gets used. And we'll pull that up, and that'll be my explanation.
Okay.
Yeah, that one should do. As you can see, there's plenty of them.
Oh.
I love this.
Oh yeah, gotta allow those cookies.
There we go.
Yeah, so there's the world, or the web, the World Wide Web that everyone knows and loves, which is where probably 99% of people operate. And that's just what is referred to here as the surface web. And then there's the deep web, which is kind of like this in-between layer, right? That is, more used by back-end systems to be able to talk to each other. And then there's the dark web, which is the one that like everyone really likes to talk about. And you have to have a special type of connection to it. You have to get everything set up. So it's not like it's much easier than it used to be, but it's not necessarily just the layperson's going to like stumble into onto the dark web and like, oh my goodness, what did I just walk into? You have to kind of go out of your way to get there. But that's where, the underhanded seediness happens in the internet world. It's all anonymized. You have to have an anonymized connection. Ridiculous marketplaces for like drugs and anything that you can imagine, really. But I mean, to an extent, even at the dark web, most of it is non-malicious or violent or evil, if you will. It's a lot of forums. You have to kind of know where you're going. There's not like necessarily a Google web browser per se. I think there are some aggregators of like forum sites and things like that, but it's not like you can go to Google and search for I want a body part and just start searching for it. But that is where typically, if you're someone like, let's use LinkedIn. I like to pick on LinkedIn, just because they've had multiple hacks. 50 million passwords are leaked, and so what'll happen is someone will take that and they'll go on the dark web. They'll post it on a forum and say, "Hey, I have 50 million highly successful password pairs, username and password pairs for 50 million individuals that I'm looking to sell." And they will sell it at maybe $1 a piece, maybe a few cents. If it's a high profile person, like maybe somebody got a celebrity's username and password, they'll sell it for more money. And there's a whole exchange on there that will, people will buy and sell. So someone might sell it for, that 50 million, they might sell it for like $1,000 or something. And then another person will take it and be like, okay, I'm going to use this to try and extort all these people or whatever. And then they'll try and say, okay, I invested $1,000. I'm going to try and make $10,000 from it. So it's a whole business. So, tools like Dashlane and the tools that we use for business wide, Dashlane's, more personalized, viewing of compromised passwords and things, but, tools that we have in place will monitor the dark web for password and credential pairs to show up on the dark web, give us an alert to be able to say, Mr. End User, Mr. and Mrs. End User, your password pair has been leaked. It's on the dark web somewhere. It might not be what you use to log into your computer, or it could be a really old password, but it's all information that's out there that someone could try and use to be able to either impersonate you or get more access than they had previously. And so it's always good if something like that pops up to change your password. And like we talked about, don't reuse passwords.
Now I can use my Dashlane to create a password for these that I've been compromised on.
Yep.
I was happy to see it was only 2, and one was from, 6 years ago. So
yeah, 6 years of somebody being able to use your password.
Yeah, I can't even remember what app it was for.
Probably LinkedIn.
Yeah. But speaking of terms, so we're going to go over 3 terms today. We're going to do 3 terms a week for
3 terms a week. New segment.
New segment.
3 terms a
we
week.
Need a bell or something. 3 terms a week. Because a lot of these terms come up and people hear them over and over, but they may not really understand what they are, if it applies to them, what they should do about it if it happens to them, like the dark web. I know we do free scans when we do a couple of the local trade shows. We'll offer free dark web scans because that could be for business, using your business email, or it can also be for personal. So for business, it's probably a little bit more important because they can access your entire network and things like that. So our first new term this week is custom threat intelligence.
I am reading off the list to make sure I use the right definition. Okay. So this is using intelligence that's found either on the dark web or on the just the general internet and patterns that exist out in the world to be able to define and build, take that information to apply it to tools that protect you. So if it's like, take email security, for instance. If there's a common phishing attack that's going around and there's certain phrasing or email address or domain or IP or things like that are being used, it might hit one account. It'll be a novel case. It'll hit that account. It'll get reported. It'll get analyzed. And then almost immediately, it will get pushed out to all of the other users or other companies that are using that tool. Or it could be an adjacent, even competitor company, if it's a open source body that is helping to find and analyze and identify all these patterns, and they just put these databases out for free for companies to use to be able to increase their security posture for others. When that gets added to the database, it then gets pushed out to the tools. So it's pretty cool. I mean, it's kind of like crowdsourcing machine. It's like it uses all the buzzwords. So, crowdsource security, because it's checking to see how everybody that's using it. It's using machine learning to analyze it, and uses artificial intelligence to analyze the patterns and things like that. So it's a buzzword soup for sure.
It's pretty interesting how it all works in the background, to protect you. Okay, next word, vulnerability scans.
That's a big one on insurance forms these days.
Is.
So
I almost say one to last, but
it's so like, I'm sure if anybody's filled out an insurance form right now for cybersecurity, there's 2 questions I get asked: internal or vulnerability scans, and that can be both internal or external, and then penetration testing. So focusing on vulnerability scans, there's both internal and external vulnerability scans, and that's just searching systems, networks, and environments for known vulnerabilities that are out there to see that individuals could use to exploit to be able to gain access. And so that's not just outside in. That's also, if someone got in, what vulnerabilities do you have in place? Do you have every device can talk to each other, kind of like we just talked about what we talked about with IoT? If someone gets onto your IoT network and it's not secured correctly, could they jump over to your primary network that has all of your sensitive data on it? So that would be an internal vulnerability. So very important. Most insurance forms now are asking, are you performing this? It's usually a yes/no answer. It's like, have you performed a vulnerability scan? Yes, no. And then it will say, when was it last completed, or how often do you run it? So we have some options to do this. And, most of the time it's whatever frequency you want it to be. We go as granular as monthly to be able to just make sure that it's catching everything as soon as it happens.
Is that a best practice monthly, you think?
I would say that's probably our internal best practice. Most of the time insurance companies are just looking for an annual one typically, but that means you could go 12 months without
a lot of
having,
stuff happens in a year.
Yeah, you could go 12 months without knowing you have a vulnerability. So that's 12 to 11 months of someone being able to have access. So,
and like you were saying on the backup, they might have had some intrusion 12 months ago, and it's been living in your network, and now to back up, you've got
all that bad stuff in it.
Yeah.
So yeah, I prefer. I mean, my recommendation is when we talk about is let's go monthly, and especially at least in the beginning, just because there's usually some things that need to be cleaned up, and then with every tweak and tune and addition of services and tools and changing of items, you want to make sure you catch it as quickly as you can.
And that just runs in the background. It doesn't interrupt work, and then it just gives a report at the end, or
So it generates a report, and then if there's things that we see that need to be remediated, then we talk with the client about it to say, here's what needs to be changed, and here's what it's going to take to do that. Sometimes that means hardware needs to be updated. Sometimes it's like we talked about the Microsoft patch today. You need to apply a patch to it. Sometimes it's more of an overhaul, or maybe there's a legacy service that client's using that is using an insecure access port or something along those lines, that it becomes a whole rework of maybe a business process that we have to talk about, is saying, do you need to be sending it this way, or is there a more secure way that you can do it? Or if that software vendor or company that you're working with doesn't support a more secure way of doing it, is that who you want to continue to be doing business with? So it can spark bigger conversations than just, I need to just make this I just need to check the box to fix the test.
Yeah. So the bigger conversation too, something to think about, is we do a lot of, and I can't stand the term, the VCIO roles, right? Everything's a V this, a V that. I'm just over it. So you have a director of IT or something at your company. A lot of these insurance companies are asking for third-party verification of some of these tests that are being run. So, or maybe they just have their hands full, or maybe they just don't even have that tool set, that they can't do. Then we just step in and we can augment a current IT department. Or
help out, advise, do whatever's needed. It's just more of, for us, we like to have those conversations because it allows us to gain more information on what's out there, how people are using it, what we need to look out for in the world. And so it's, us working with clients, not only, it's not a one-sided relationship from that standpoint. The findings that we have from one client help us internally improve just as much as the findings that we have to implement there help them to improve.
And for an IT director, sometimes for him to sell it to his own C-suite, he needs third party to say, yes, this is what you should be doing. A lot of times they just don't have that leverage with their own group. So it's good to have an outside source.
Good validation, right?
Validation, that's the word I was looking for. All right, last one, which is probably one of my favorite ones, the intrusion detection.
Since it's your favorite, how well do you know it?
I don't know it very well, but I love the term because I just picture the whole Will Robinson, danger, intrusion detection.
So intrusion detection kind of works along the line, can work hand in hand with vulnerability testing. So it's monitoring to see if there is unwanted access or unauthorized access or changes happening in your environment. It alerts and then allows for notification for remediation of things. So it's monitoring your environment to know if something bad is happening in it. If you don't have a way to know when something bad happens, you're not probably going to know that there's something going on until it's too late, because at that point it's going to be way in your face and you're like, oh my gosh, something bad is happening. But if we can catch a foothold being added at the beginning before they're able to get in and collect data anonymously. Sometimes some attacks aren't in your face. They're not oh, here's a ransomware that shut down your entire business. It could be they get a foothold, they get access to private information, competitive information, and they just sit there and they farm it and they use it for their own personal gain. And it never shows up in your face as far as like a ransomware attack or shutting your system down. And they're just sitting there, eating your data all day, and you never know it. And so that's where intrusion detection comes into place, is to help identify and bring those things out of the shadow so you can remediate and protect. And then doing that in conjunction with a vulnerability scan, let's say, can help you shut down their access.
Yep. 3 good ones this week. Next week, we're going to do network monitoring, penetration testing. That's another one of my favorite ones, and endpoint detection. So that's a good one. Chris, do we have any other questions?
No other questions.
Okay. Also next week, I know I'm beating a dead horse here. We're going to talk about layered security again, but we have a very fun way, easy way for all of us to get it. Daniel thought I was kidding today when I said, hey, next week we're going to do this. And
I still think she's kidding.
And I say, no, I'm serious.
Until it shows up next week, I won't believe it.
All right. So you better tune in next week, not turn in. Turn in next week.
Yeah.
No, thanks for joining us, and hopefully we'll see you next week.